All right. I would like to welcome everybody to our parent night tonight. I'm Maria Wiscombe. I work for the Utah Parent Center, and I'm a parent consultant that works specifically with families in Alpine School District, and I work closely with the special education department. But I help families who need help and support with IEPs and 504 plans and behavior needs, help them connect to resources through the schools as well as community resources. So that's a little bit about my role. We have Aubrey Evans here. She's an OT in the school district, and I'll let her give a little intro on her, but I've worked with her a little bit in IEP meetings, and I think she's gonna do an awesome job with her presentation. She's got a vast knowledge of everything sensory, right? So, and then we have Ryan. Yeah, yep. And then we have Ryan Hemming also participating with us tonight. He is this director over secondary schools for special education. He's also over the gross motor team, or the motor team, which is APE, physical therapy, and OT. So he's going to also help man the chat box.
Yep. Good to be here.
And there's Ryan. All right. So Aubrey, go ahead. We'll turn the time over to you.
All right. Well, I'm Aubrey, and disclaimer, I don't know everything about sensory. I think there's a lot of things out there to know, and this presentation, although I had a lot of fun putting it together, it doesn't even necessarily brush the surface of what we could all know, but it does give us some good tips, hopefully. And I also wanted to say there may be some of you guys out there, your parents, who've had experience with some things. And as you watch this presentation and as we answer questions, there may be instances where you have a question in the chat and a parent answers that question. Or maybe Ryan Hemming answers that question, or I do. But we can all help each other together. I don't know that any of us are super experts, but I think together we can find answers. And then also, if you have a question and I don't necessarily know the answer, I do know how to find the answers. So I might say I don't know, but I can find it, and then you can email me, or I can, we can figure it out that way. So that's my little disclaimer. So here goes our little presentation. See if it will work. It's always fun doing PowerPoint over Zoom. It's a new thing. And then Maria and Ryan can just stop me anytime, and they'll ask questions periodically that you all might have that goes in the chat. So just a little outline here, and I'll try to stay on schedule. We're going to just talk about quick the 8 types of senses, and then we'll talk about the types of sensory processing disorder, how it's kind of classified. And then we'll talk about some specific ideas to help during the holidays, and then a couple of things to help throughout the year. Talk about some pre-teaching strategies before you get in tricky situations sensory-wise, before you get into that awkward holiday meltdown. And then we'll have some time for questions and discussion. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Quite a bit of my information, just a disclaimer and reference here, comes from the STAR Institute for Sensory Processing Disorder. That's a clinic out in Denver, Colorado. And it was founded by Lucy Jane Miller, who's one of the top sensory experts in the nation and really the world. And then Dr. Sarah Schoen is a lead researcher there. Dr. Miller is no longer there, but we do have a lady named Virginia Spielman who's there. I'm not affiliated with them, but a lot of the things I know come from the trainings I've attended there and the books that they've put out and the website. So that's been super great to teach me what I know, and I've been able to put some of those things into practice. So that's the website there. If I guess I can point to it right here. If you're hoping to get some good resources from tonight, this is a fantastic resource. The STAR Center also put out recently a sensory symposium online in October. and they invited a guest speaker named Kim Clary, and she's an OT. She also is an adult with autism and sensory processing disorder. So she gave a lot of really great tips from the OT perspective, but also from a perspective of an adult with autism and sensory processing disorder. So I'll have a lot of tools from her and some things there, and those, each slide that I might have information on, you'll see this is from the Star Center, or it's cited, or it's from Kim Clary. And again, I don't have affiliation with them, but they are pretty much the experts, and so, you know, we want to learn from the best. So there you go. These are some water beads. There's some fun sensory tools. Okay, so here is a picture of our 8 senses. Most of us grow up and we think the textbook, everybody has 5 senses. You know, and you learn that when you're young, we've got smell and sight and taste and hearing and touch. But I wanted to talk about 3 specifically. Let's see if I can get a pen here. We've got interoception, the vestibular sense, and proprioception. And you can kind of see by the stars that I've already kind of highlighted these, you can kind of tell in the pictures what they might mean, but we've got, I've got a slide coming up that will tell us this. Interoception, while we have the picture up here, is how we feel internally. So can we tell when our bladder is full, and, you know, if how our organs are functioning, if we're hot and cold, those kinds of things. Vestibular sense has to do with the inner ear. We have 3 semicircular canals in the inner ear with some hair cells, and there's some little particles that go and move the hair cells in each canal, but depending on where the fluid is flowing through, that will help us understand, are we going forward, backward, side, up, down, are we going rotationally? So the vestibular input is a little bit about, you know, balance and movement and understanding the senses from movement. And then proprioception is a lot about how our muscles and joints are feeling. This one's a really good sense for calming. I love proprioception. I think like my superpower would be the proprioceptor. Like that would be my awesome superhero name, and my superpower to feel everything. I love feeling our muscles and joints. It helps us know where our body is in space in relation to other parts of our body. So I can tell right now that my hands are up because I can sense it. And if I were to close my eyes, I could still say, oh, my hands are up in the air. And proprioception also helps us detect how much force we're using and how much force we might need to use. Kids with difficulty with proprioception might not understand that they're pushing too hard or too soft, things like that. They might not understand where their body is in space and have some poor body relations. Okay, I'm just going to go to the next slide. So here's the 3 that we just kind of talked about. I'm going to make a terrible attempt here to circle these just for fun, interactive, you know, little part. But proprioceptive sense, and it will just kind of define it for us, awareness of, you know, where our body is in space, how much strength or force we need, being able to feel your muscles and joints and know, you know, where is my body. The vestibular sense we talked about, and the interoceptive sense we talked about as well. So those are some sensory systems that we're going to be talking about. Okay. So this is my favorite graphic to show because when we talk about sensory, that's like a broad word. And sometimes we hear sensory processing disorder. Sometimes we hear sensory integration. Sometimes we hear just different things, tactile. And we're hearing all of these words that are kind of popping out. Sensory integration, sensory processing is kind of, it's kind of a hot topic right now, but I think there's quite a few words that we might not really understand. So these are the words that I'm familiar with, and this is how sensory processing disorder is classified. And we'll go through these today. We're going to go through number 1. Unfortunately, I do not have time to go through number 2 and number 3, but we'll talk about it a little bit briefly here. Most of the problems I'm anticipating through the holidays are going to come with this number 1 part, but there are challenges that come with number 2 and number 3. Additionally, I'm going to say their names really quick, actually. So sensory modulation disorder is kind of the first group in the umbrella, the nosology that we have. The second one is sensory-based motor disorder. And the third is sensory discrimination disorder. And they're all part of this umbrella of sensory processing disorder. A lot of kids may fall really cleanly into one category, but some kids might not. Some kids might have a little bit of everything, and that's okay. So sensory processing disorder is very much like autism, where there's not just one type and we all look the same. All of us with sensory processing disorder, you can just tell, boom, you have SPD. It might look differently, and it's going to manifest differently in different kids, and that's totally fine. So breaking it down, sensory modulation disorder has to do with how we're receiving sensory input into our brains, processing it, and then interpreting it. So basically, we've got three little components of sensory modulation. Sensory over responsivity, and we'll talk about thresholds in a second, but I'll use that term and know that we'll define it in a minute. Sensory over responsivity is about having too much input and that it goes over your threshold and it's just too much. So if kids are hearing sounds that don't necessarily bother others, but they're really annoyed by noises, or if a tag in their clothing is bothering them and they're annoyed by that texture, it's noxious to them because they have a lower threshold, and their brain is not modulating that input as well. Sensory under responsivity, and we'll talk about these more as we go through, is where you need a lot of input. You're not modulating that as well because you need more than the typical neurotypical child or adult. And you're under responsive to those things. You might hear sounds but not register them. So the way we're modulating is different. And then sensory craving is more, we need lots and lots and lots, and we can't get enough, and it's more dysregulating. The more movement we get, the more dysregulated we are. And a lot of these sensory over-responsive, sensory under-responsive, sensory craving, these modulation types of sensory processing disorder, those ones definitely play into emotions as well. So we get a lot of emotional responses. The second one here, number 2, sensory-based motor disorder, we've got a category there that's dyspraxia, and then we've got postural disorder. And like I said, we're not going to go into detail with these in the presentation, but there's quite a bit to be understood in these areas as well. Lots on the website that I showed you. There's lots about these types in books. So we can learn more about them. We just don't have time tonight. But just for a general overview, dyspraxia has to do with our motor skills and our ability to move and to move smoothly and in a coordinated manner. If you've heard of praxis, it's kind of how we're coordinating and moving. How are we planning out ideas? How are we coming up with ideas? How are we sequencing them? How are we following through? Those kinds of things. A lot of kids might have a hard time coming up with an idea. Oh, hey, there's this jungle gym. What am I going to do first? What am I going to do second? Or, hey, I have this play plan. I'm going to invite Jimmy and Tommy and Charlie to come play tag with me. They might not necessarily know that. And in schools, we might see these kids kind of standing to the side of the playground because they're not quite sure how to join in. They're not sure what to do with their bodies and what to do with their minds. A lot of that is dyspraxia. You can also find you have students and children who have a hard time, being coordinated, and they might look like, they have no idea what they're doing when they're moving. You're like, how are you walking from this side of the room to the other side? It looks kind of like strange. You might lift your eyebrow at that because that motor plan is tricky for them. So that's a sensory processing disorder as well. Postural disorder has to do with our ability to right ourselves against gravity and to be able to hold our cores up, our bodies up, and keep attention. It has to do with the muscular strength and endurance, and also the signals that our brain are receiving from our muscles, and being able to understand where are we in gravity and how much force do I have to use in my core to right myself. Am I falling over? I don't know. So those are some postural disorder examples. You might see students with postural disorder might have a really hard time with tummy time when they're little, and when they're a little bit older, working in prone, which is on that stomach and up in the elbows. They might have a hard time with sitting up. They might be bracing on their arm like this. They might have a hard time at the dinner table, just flopping up and keeping their head up might be exhausting for them. And then we've got sensory discrimination disorder. And this is just being able to be aware of subtle differences between the stimuli. So for visual, an example would be being able to detect the difference between a lowercase b and a lowercase d. Knowing that, oh, one letter is on one side and the bump is on the other side of the letter. Auditory discrimination is, a lot of different things, but being able to detect loud, soft, where an auditory stimulus is coming from, being able to detect, high pitch, low pitch, those kinds of things. Tactile is, smooth, bumpy. Taste and smell, being able to discriminate, oh, sweet, sour, what does it taste like? Subtle differences there. Position and movement, where is my body in space? How much force do I need? A lot of those kinds of things. And then interoception, oh, I'm detecting my stomach's hungry, or I'm detecting I have to use the restroom, my bladder's full, or I think I'm really thirsty. And understanding, hey, these signals from my body that come to my brain, what is that telling me? That's kind of what sensory discrimination disorder is. That was a lot. Do we have any questions at this point in the chat? Okay, I'm thinking no.
We do not.
Okay, so we'll just keep going. So we are going to talk about this sensory modulation disorder, difficulty regulating responses to sensory input. The responses in our behavior, basically, we're looking at are not adjusted to the situation. So maybe the situation is not interpreted as noxious to us, but to a child with sensory difficulties, it might be interpreted as noxious, and those children might have a really hard time regulating their responses. This next bullet point, and this is from the Star Center, by the way, there's a little copyright down here, so I'm just giving due credit to these guys. Difficulty achieving and maintaining an optimal range of arousal. So this arousal is basically alertness. How alert are we? Are we like way hyper? Are we just right? Or are we like super low and lethargic? Being labeled as a disorder, it's got to disrupt everyday life to a significant level. I would say, and this is really important, I would say all of us have sensory challenges, but not all of us have sensory processing disorder. For example, I have tactile defensiveness when it comes to carpet. I hate brushing my feet on carpet and just dragging them, or my hand, I go crazy, and it's like nails on a chalkboard to me. But I don't have sensory processing disorder because that does not disrupt my life in a severe enough way. I just put on socks and I'm fine. Or I just walk like normally, I don't have to drag my feet. But that part really does bother me. I just know how to adapt to it. And it's a tiny little, thing that I don't love. My sister has a problem with cotton balls. She hates the way that they taste. Sorry, not taste. I'm thinking of Buddy the Elf, you guys. She hates the way that they feel. And so if we put them on her body, or if she were to see one and use one in a doctor's office, that would be really difficult for her, but it's not a big deal. She can get through it. She's not going to have a meltdown, a sensory meltdown, and she knows, hey, I just don't like cotton balls. That's okay. But these sensory modulation disorders, they are more severe. We get a reaction that's severe. We get a behavior that's severe, and it is going to disrupt our ability to adapt to challenges and to get through our lives. And then one more thing, I sort of mentioned this before, sensory modulation disorders are not always cut and dry. Sometimes we're over-responsive in some of our 8 senses, but in others of those senses, we might be a little bit under-responsive, or we might be craving. So we might be over-responsive, really sensitive to some noise, but maybe we're under responsive to tactile stuff. We don't, we don't sense the things that are touching us or that we're touching. So there's not always, kids don't always fall cleanly into these categories, but sometimes they do, and that's okay too. Here's this threshold theory I was talking about that I said I would kind of come back to. So this red line kind of depicts and represents like a neurotypical threshold where most of us can receive these input and detect it. And if we were to go under that input, we might not necessarily detect it, or it wouldn't be, a big deal to us. If we're to go over that threshold, we might be like, whoa, too much. So an example of going over the threshold might be if we're at a really loud rock concert and we're getting way too much auditory input. That might be a little bit over. An example of under would be maybe we're like kind of sort of asleep and we're hearing what somebody's trying to say to us, but we're not quite getting it because we're not quite alert. That would be an example of under. With sensory over-responsive students and children, their threshold is depicted here with this black line. So they're actually so much lower, they only need a little bit of input to detect it. Anything over that might set them off, and they're gonna have a response to that. And it doesn't mean that they're bad kids or that they have terrible emotional regulation. Their brain is truly trying to understand and interpret information, and it's at capacity. So an example of this would be like if I've worked with kiddos who've had tags or seams in their clothing that really bother them, and they're getting that threshold met just fine with tactile input, but those seams and those tags are just that much more noticeable, and it's going over the threshold and it's becoming really noxious to them. And so they don't want to wear those clothes, and then they don't want to wear that underwear, and that's when we have a problem. We also have kids who are really auditorily defensive who may be covering ears like this. Especially I see that at assemblies or in the lunchroom. That would be sensory over-responsive, where their threshold is lower and they're getting a lot of input and it's going over their threshold, where for a neurotypical student or somebody without sensory processing challenges, that information might be just fine. It's not even reaching their threshold yet, and it's okay. They can kind of tune it out and they can modulate and regulate. But a person with sensory processing challenges may not do that. Sensory under-responsive is kind of the opposite. The kids with sensory under-responsivity have a high threshold up here. So they might be getting the same information we need to, like we are, to register, and a neurotypical student might be registering a sound when somebody's name is called. Hey, Aubrey, I usually turn. But sometimes kids with sensory under-responsivity might not detect those sensations until they're at a super high level. They might not, their brains might not be able to detect those because their input is coming in, but they need more and more input in order to detect that. So they're having a hard time modulating there. So here's the, yeah.
Do you mind if I interrupt with a question? You paused there briefly, so I thought I'd
yes, I took a breath.
So we have a question that says, if I have two kids on the spectrum that are on the opposite sides, so the SOR and SUR, any ideas on how to help that SOR child with autism to be able to tolerate the SUR?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's something that's super important to notice, is that people and families have different sensory profiles, right? So that's a very typical situation. It's really important to talk about these kinds of things with your kids in a way that we can understand. So something like, hey, your brother Jimmy, he just needs just a little bit to be just right. And you can talk about it kind of using like the Goldilocks method, with the big bowls and the big beds versus little bowls and little beds, and then just right. And everybody has a just right for ourselves. So that's really important, because then those kids can maybe help understand, they can start understanding each other. Also, depending on, like with autism, it is really tricky for kids with autism to sometimes understand a different person's point of view. That's called theory of mind, and there's a lot of trickiness with that process. So I find that social stories work really well. And then sensory overresponsive and sensory underresponsive both respond pretty well to proprioceptive and vestibular input. And we'll talk about that later on. And so there will be some slides with tools. If you want to jot down a couple tools that work for both sensory overresponsive and sensory underresponsive, feel free to do that. The input might be the same sense. With sensory overresponsive, you're going to want to do things predictably. And with sensory underresponsive, you're going to want to kind of mix it up. And that's okay too. But there are some of the same tools that you can do. You can bring both of your children to the playground. You can bring both of your children on a walk. And you might have one of your kids with, noise canceling headphones on, and that's okay. So those are a couple strategies. I hope that helps. Okay, I will move on. So we're going to talk in depth. A lot of my students mostly the sensory underresponsive kids don't cause as much, I don't want to say trouble. They don't get on the nerves of parents and teachers as much because it's like, oh, we're in our own little world. We're not screaming as much, but it is hard to get their attention. The ones that I kind of work with a lot more that kind of are on their radar at first are students with sensory overresponsivity who really struggle. I have this little picture of this little boy trying to touch this little girl, and she's like crying, and I just think of this song to help me remember sensory overresponsivity. I just think of this song, can't touch this, right? Because we don't want to be touched. We don't want to touch other things. We don't want to have, that's too much for me, So we've got that song, it's the theme song of this part of sensory modulation. So we kind of talked about this a little bit, but we'll go more in depth real quick. So these kids are hypersensitive to sensations like sights, sound, touch, textures, movement, smells, taste. So, and we might be also hypersensitive to interoception things like stomach aches, and those things might register really loudly in their brain. These sometimes these kids can be really bothered by normal, air quotes, normal things like smells in a restaurant. It could really overwhelm them. Right now I'm pregnant, so I would say I'm a little sensory overresponsive to especially smells. We can avoid, kids may be bothered by touch from others, textures, tags, seams in clothing. A lot of my students and kids that I've worked with in the past have been really bothered by movement, being in a car or up too high, and that has to deal with sensory overresponsivity to the vestibular sense. Moving quickly, any kind of rotational movement. We don't like spinning. We don't like being carried up. We don't like diaper changes, especially if our head is tilted back a little bit. So that can be really, really stressful for some of our kids with overresponsivity. Loud sounds or strange sounds. And then haircuts. Haircuts is a big one. Brushing and combing hair, anything tactile like that. That's super tricky for these kiddos. Okay, sensory overresponsivity behaviors. These are things that we might see. The kids might respond too much, too frequently, or for too long to sensory input. Remember that they're having a hard time modulating it. They're having a hard time regulating it. And then again, this is just the copyright from the Star Institute. When they're overwhelmed by sensory stimulation, they might be really upset by transitions, especially kids with sensory processing and autism. Sometimes sensory processing disorders can stand alone, and a lot of the time it co-occurs with autism. Sometimes it can co-occur with anxiety as well and ADHD. But transitions are really tricky for kids who have autism. And then sensory processing disorders kind of make it even trickier, especially when you're over-responsive. Unexpected changes are hard. Aggressive and impulsive, irritable, fussy, moody, unsociable, avoid group activities because of so much sensory stimuli, and has trouble forming relationships. Excessively cautious, afraid to try new things. And then sometimes these kiddos can be labeled as fussy babies, difficult, or out of control, because they don't know how to respond to that input, and it's really difficult for them. It's like inside the brain, it's just so loud they can't stop it, and it's really upsetting. It's really hard because as parents and as teachers and as OTs, we're looking at these kids and we don't always understand what's going on because we can't see it inside the brain. But we do really need to know, hey, it is a real thing. It's a real experience for this kid. And again, sometimes kids don't have the language skills to tell us, and sometimes they might not be verbal, and that's okay too, but we do want to know this is a real thing, and they might not be screaming for no reason. There's probably a reason. So sensory over responsivity is kind of like the Grinch, and he's like, and I have this little link that you can go to with the video. I don't dare do it over Zoom because things are going so well, knock on wood so far. But the Grinch is like talking about the who's in Whoville, and he's like, and then they're gonna wake up on Christmas morning and they're gonna open their presents, and then all that noise, and he's going crazy because it's so much for him. It's like too much, right? That's our sensory over responsive child, and all of the who's are doing fine. They're not bothered by that sensory information, but it does bother the Grinch. We know there's other reasons too that it bothers him, but just for the sake of example, that's our sensory over-responsive character. We've talked about this now, the sensory over-responsivity. I'm going to pause to see, do we have any more questions? Okay.
Well, Aubrey, we had a question. Well, we had a comment about saying my son is SOR during lunchtime. He also deals with autism.
Yeah.
I've seen some IEP teams work with accommodations like wearing noise canceling headphones
At lunchtime for sure.
or eating lunch in a smaller group.
Absolutely.
Outside of the lunchroom.
Sure, definitely. And you can work with your school-based OT on that as well. But those are two accommodations I really like, the noise canceling headphones, and they don't cancel all noises, but they do kind of dampen them. And additionally, eating in a smaller group, or maybe trying to eat facing the wall so we're not seeing everything, because the visual stimuli can be a lot. The sensory stimulus from the smells can be a lot. So maybe eating a little bit farther away from the group, those kinds of things. And then you'll see in the tools when we get there, sometimes doing a movement break right before, deep pressure, and some movement can be really calming to students who have sensory over-responsivity. And so you could even work in a movement break right before lunch, knowing, hey, this is a tricky time. And it could be something simple as transitioning from the classroom to the lunchroom by saying, hey, I want you to carry the lunch tote bin thingy. And we're taking all of the lunches there or back, because that's something really heavy and really functional, but it's very calming. There's a lot of research that says proprioception, proprioceptive input is very calming. And it is. It helps our brains to kind of organize and kind of think, okay, things are okay, and to kind of calm down. So those kind of suggestions I would offer, along with talking to your school-based therapist. And then there might be some later on in the presentation.
So we have one more question. She just posted another one, so let me try and put them together.
Okay.
So she says, any ideas for a teenager SOR who is afraid of anything that makes noise, even the fridge or anything that is a toy that might make noise?
Yeah.
And then she says, you mentioned that SOR kids should also get lots of vestibular and proprioceptive input. If they won't even accept hugs, how do you suggest that is given?
Sure. And I love to, I think we just got, okay, yeah, I think we got some questions, so thank you so much. The first piece there, a teenager who's afraid of anything that makes noise, even the fridge, I would say kind of doing some pre-teaching, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then just say, hey, this thing's going to make noise. And he probably anticipates that with the fridge. There may be some things that he, throughout the holidays, he may or may not anticipate. Hey, this is going to make a lot of noise. So talking about that. And then allowing him to try those things out carefully on his own, starting with noise canceling earbuds, or there's a great brand called Vibes, and I list that I think later in the presentation. Vibes earbuds that started out as like a concert, like a noise canceling earbud for going to concerts, but then Autism Speaks found out about it, and they've kind of been working really well with kids with autism. So Vibes earbuds, they're like white and clear. You can start out with that and go slowly with trying to some noises out and then self-administration, and we'll talk about this later, or it will be in a slide, allowing the kids to try these out on their own rather than having somebody else do that to them. So things like hugs, which were mentioned in the comments, that one's tricky because a kid with sensory over responsivity can't control that and doesn't necessarily know how hard or how soft or how long the hug's going to last. So allowing them to hug somebody first, or maybe allowing them to hug something they're comfortable with, like a pillow or a stuffed animal, depending on the age, and you want it to be age appropriate, and then maybe allowing them to initiate a hug. And the tighter the hug, the better with proprioception. A loose hug is going to be more noxious to the nervous system for a kiddo with sensory overresponsivity. So there's a couple tips. You might see some more tips in the tools part as well. So hopefully that helps. There's a great book by Lucy Jane Miller that you can look up, and Carol Kranowitz. I'll have to put those in the notes at the end. But Carol Kranowitz's is called The Out of Sync Child, and that one's a really, really good read. It's for parents by a teacher, either preschool or kindergarten teacher, but who knows about quite a bit about this, and she's done some presentations that I've gone to as well. So she can have some more strategies. Do we want to answer any other questions?
There are a couple on here, Aubrey. The next one after, let's see, you answered the one about, oh no, this one says, you mentioned that SOR kids should also get lots of vestibular and proprioceptive input if they won't even accept hugs. How do you suggest that is given? Did you already answer that one? Sorry.
No, not quite. And I think that's also from Lainey or Lonnie. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. So a tight hug is better for a sensory over-responsive kiddo. Tight is really good. The loose ones are maybe going to be a struggle for them. Tight is going to really activate deep pressure and be more calming. And some proprioceptive input and vestibular input for a kid with sensory over-responsivity. We'll give some tools in a minute in a couple slides. And so that would answer it. And then, of course, we can ask more specifics at the end if those slides don't answer that question.
Okay, and then the last one before we move on just was, Heather says, just mentioning homework sends my SOR son into overload. What ways could I set up a win-win schedule without upsetting him?
Yeah, I think I know Heather, so hi Heather. I would say, having it predictable. We're going to talk about some sensory tools, but one of them is a visual schedule. And maybe he could pick the order. So maybe he comes home and you have a after school routine. So we maybe got 3 choices. We've got, homework and dinner and, like a free time or maybe reading or something like that. And maybe you can start out trying to put homework at the top or maybe at the bottom. Maybe he gets to pick the order. But having the child in charge of something, giving them a choice really does help quite a bit with behavior. And then I would also wonder, are they worried about homework right away when they come home? or is it at any point in the night? Are we having enough transition time and enough relax and play time? Is it just that they don't like homework? Is it too hard for them? So that one is a pretty loaded question because there's a lot of aspects to homework. But I do say that giving choices and using a visual schedule and then also a reward system, those things can work really well. And giving them a little bit of power and control over some things. A lot of the times, kids with sensory over responsivity don't feel like they're in control very much, and that can really lead to some anxiety.
Okay, I think that was, oh, actually we got another
one more. You guys, I love all the questions. I'm hoping that I can answer some of them. If not, we can also look up some resources too.
Do you want to?
I'm wondering, well, hold on a second, Ryan. I'm wondering if we should move ahead and then see if some of these are going to be answered with some of the strategies she's going to share.
Let's do that.
Great.
And we'll have 30
we'll
minutes
just make
at the
sure
end,
that we
right?
come back around. Yeah, we'll make sure that we come back around to answer them.
Okay, sounds good. So this next part, sensory under-responsivity, we're not going to explain as much in depth. I think we've hit some of these things, but these are some of the signs and behaviors you might see if a kiddo has sensory under-responsivity. So passive, quiet, withdrawn, kind of feels like they're in their own little world. They might seem lazy. They might be easily exhausted by things. That's the sensory under-responsivity. And I'm going to go quick here because we've sort of talked about it. And then what we haven't talked about as much is this sensory craving. And I've got little Tigger because he's like a sensory craver. So here's some signs. I don't want to say signs and symptoms, but some behaviors you might see. This kid is having the time of his life, just in case you couldn't tell. He is loving life and he's going crazy, right? So they're always on the move, crashing, bumping, bashing, playing rough and tumble, excessive spinning, swinging, or rolling, hanging off of things. I see a lot of kids in schools with handrails that are just really hanging on them, and more so than other students, intruding on personal space, just fast and furious. And then the key here is the more movement they get, the more proprioception, the more vestibular, the more dysregulated they become. So they might go all over the place and then they get more and more, and it's not like an addiction, but it kind of can be compared to one. It's almost like now I need more and more. There was a theory a few years ago that sensory craving, the more information we gave them, sensory information we give them, the better it would be. But now we know better, and I'll talk about that in a couple slides. So here's some intervention ideas for the holidays. I think this is what we're all wondering, right? Like tools. So here's for sensory over-responsivity, and hopefully this will help some of the questions too. And I have another slide as well. So these are some general ones, but provide predictability. Wow, that did not work out, that little line, sorry. But things that are examples are visual schedules, talking it through and being able to tell your student or your child, hey, this is what we're going to be doing. And hey, we're going to be going to grandma's house for Christmas, and remember your cousin Jimmy's going to be there, and it's going to be a little crazy, and here's what we're going to do to mitigate that. We're going to take the upstairs room, and Jimmy's going to take the basement room, and we're going to try some things. So just allowing the child to have some predictability as much as possible, knowing what's going to happen. And life isn't like that all the time, but when you can, it's good so that they can anticipate it. We always talk about feedback, but I like to use the phrase feed forward as well, anticipating hey, this might happen, what's a tool that we could use? Allowing a child to help plan. So I'm thinking a lot about Thanksgiving meals. Thanksgiving, and it's a little different this year with COVID, possibly with what you're gathering may or may not look like. But the smells and the textures and the colors and the sounds and all of the things going on and the stress, it can be really tricky for students and for my kiddos that I work with. So allowing them to help plan the menu, getting them involved in those kinds of things, getting them involved with the grocery shopping and allowing them to kind of discover on their own, wow, what does a sweet potato look like and feel like and even sound like, exploring that texture and explain that sweet potato when it's raw versus when it's cooked, and not making a student eat when they really don't want to, not forcing it. It's good. And then allowing the child, we kind of talked about this, but to administer sensation for themselves or to be in control of it. So if you really want them to touch something, then allow them to touch it and don't force it on them, because that might break a trust barrier, but really make it playful, make it fun. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. Low and slow calming activities, and we'll talk about this, but linear swinging, proprioception and vestibular, where you're doing it to them or they're helping. What's on the next slide, we'll kind of explain that a little bit more. And then deep pressure, and it really helps. And when we say that, it's related to proprioception. So it's allowing us, the more pressure I put on my hips, the more pressure I feel, it's allowing me to feel my muscles and my joints, and that's really calming. So things like weighted blankets, carrying something heavy, a massage, bear hugs, those kinds of things. And then this slide has lots of concrete ideas, and I have to apologize. This is supposed to be an O, so you may want to fix that on your, if you've printed out the worksheet. But calming smells, and here's a list of them, especially for the holidays. Weighted blankets or anything weighted, building forts where they can just feel like enclosed and safe and they don't have to see a lot of crazy visual stimuli. And also that's going to really help with your relationship and play. Bubble baths can be very calming depending on the student. Linear swinging or rocking, so we don't want rotational here, but anything like a rocking chair, and you can think about how babies kind of calm down with rocking movements. Linear swinging on a playground, that's very calming to kids. And these things you can do before a big sensory transition, or like before a big meal, or before you know there might be a problem. Do these things beforehand. Things that are really good also, like animal walks, running, getting a bike ride in, anything that's a really heavy active kind of activity is going to be helpful to these kids with over responsivity. It's going to be calming. Joint compressions, kind of like squeezing at different joints around on the body, and sometimes even having them squeeze their own head. Sometimes most kids like us doing it to them, or they'll tolerate it, but if they don't like that, you can allow them to administer the squeezes to themselves. We'll call them horse bites on the legs. And I often make up a story if it's a smaller child or a younger child. I'll make up a story about like princesses putting on their bracelets, and we've got to do it really tight so they don't fall off, and we're going to go galloping on the horse, and we've got to put on our big, horse riding slacks and our chaps and different things. You can make a story so that they're also using their brain, and then they're kind of calming down, concentrating on the story and getting the input. Burrito blanket roll-ups, rolling up in a blanket. It's kind of like a swaddle as a baby, very calming. Lifting heavy objects, and you can make this very functional. Maybe Tommy's chore day every day is bringing in the groceries or taking out the trash, or whatever it needs to be. During the holidays, especially when we've got snow, if there's a chance to have them go sledding, you can have them pull you on the sled, or they can push you on the sled, and they're getting a lot of heavy work and proprioception into their joints. We talked about noise canceling headphones, and here's the Vibes earplug. Sometimes if they just need to escape in a socially acceptable way, just having them go to the bathroom or step outside. And then here are some fun products I'm not associated with, but I just have heard from some students that I've worked with, and parents as well as adults with autism. The Stretch Ease is a good one. It's kind of like a lycra stretchy sheet that you kind of put over yourself, but you can use it almost like a body sock, and then body socks, and then lycra stretch sheets. So they're all kind of the same material, and the lycra stretch sheets that you can use on your bed at night, and so kids can kind of tuck in and feel really enclosed. So that's kind of fun. I'm hoping that answers some of the questions. Here's some more concrete tools. Kim Clary is that adult with autism and sensory processing, and she's also an OT. So she's just showing coping keychains and cards, and I'll let you guys look at that later because of time. But here's just some strategies for, she will say what she's anticipating. What am I doing? Okay, there might be some challenges here in the social event, and here's my strategies. Here's some eating out strategies. If you have students who are struggling eating out, or in the lunchroom, but at a restaurant, asking to turn down music, sitting facing a wall, knowing kind of what to expect, and maybe bringing your own food as a backup. Noise canceling headphones we talked about, regulating before the outing. We talked about sitting away from the kitchen or serving areas for smell and hearing purposes. So those are good. Strategies for under responsivity are some right here. So we want to increase arousal in an organized way, but also something that's a little bit unpredictable. We want fast blast activities, and we want high intensity here. So that kid is their threshold up here. We're going to really try to reach their threshold and get their brain to register the input. We want less rhythmical, more arousing. So this is where our rotational swinging comes in, and random sensory stuff comes in. Random to them, we know we've got a plan, we know what we're doing, and an OT can help you with that. The sensory information can be tactile, proprioceptive, and or vestibular. So at one point I talked about how you can take your kid, an SOR and an SUR kid, both to the playground. The SUR kid might need a lot of rotational swinging, and they're that kid that wraps the chains around and around and just rotates on the swing. The sensory over responsive kid might just want to stick with that linear swinging, but you can use the same tool for both modulation disorders. You just use it in a little bit of a different way. The sensory over responsive is going to need predictable, slow, and calm stuff, where the under responsivity kid is going to need a lot of stuff and really a lot of energy kind of things. Fast rotation on the swing, flashlight tag on the wall for visual, and then you can also use stimulation of taste and smell to increase arousal. Scooter board ramp, I'm sure you guys all have those in your homes, right? No, but you can definitely use slides on playgrounds and different things to crash. I like to take pillows and cushions off of the couches and just crash into them and have kind of like a fun, safe way to get a lot of stimulation and deep pressure. This is kind of a joke and kind of awesome. I'm a Star Wars fan. So this guy is Kylo Ren on Undercover Boss, which is really on Saturday Night Live or something. But we're talking about sensory under-responsivity and how we want our facial expressions to really tell the story, because kiddos with SUR might not understand things if we're just being kind of a typical, so we really want to be animated. So here's a do and don't. This is Matt. He's pretending to be a radar technician, even though he's Kylo Ren, and he's like, hey. But then later he gets really angry, and so his face is really telling the story, and this is kind of in a blooper of Adam Driver. And if you want some entertainment, feel free to watch it there. We'll go to the next page. So let me just move this part. Here we go. Strategies for sensory craving. These are the kiddos who need a lot of activity, but the more activity they get, the more kind of hyper they get and dysregulated. So the key here is to stop the activity in increments and also to make it functional. So we want to provide a lot of activity, but make sure it's purposeful or functional. So an example here is if your kid's on the monkey bars and they're just going, we want to provide a functional story. Hey, you're a gymnast. I wonder if you could do this, and start having their brains do something purposefully instead of just going wild. If the kid is running and crazy and you need them to transition, you can say, hey, let's race to the door. And now we've got a functional thing. Let's race to the door and put on our shoes. They can get that movement they need, but there's always a purpose for it. Or let's say you need them to, maybe you need something from a different room. Hey, race to that other room, grab this thing for me and bring it back. I'm going to time you. And it's a functional activity where we're now giving purpose to that movement, and we're giving a start and an end. And they know, hey, there's parameters here. Those parameters are really important. You can do things like help moving heavy furniture, all of those things. And we're going to move on for time's sake, but feel free to look at these. This response inhibition is good, and like creeping around a corner, that's going to be really good for the kids. They're going to have to inhibit what their body wants to do. And then here's some functional activities for the holidays for sensory craving. So building snow forts, having your child pull a sled maybe up a hill or across a hill. Doing some shoveling is really good, heavy work and functional. There's a start, and then we end when the sidewalk's shoveled or whatever it is. There's a start and end. You can do this little like helicopter thing that we called it the helicopter growing up as parents. Snow angels and building a snowman. I also really like this spinning egg chair from IKEA. You can start and stop it as a parent and play peekaboo with it. You can get them on, I've got mine, I've got two and I got them off KSL, but you can get them at IKEA. Here's some tools you can use if a kiddo is craving oral input. And I'm gonna have to go through this a little fast since we need to get to some questions. Then this is just some strategies throughout the year, some general strategies. And there's an acronym of process. This is taken from Lucy Jane Miller at the STAR Institute. But it's really important to be a play partner with your child and let the child kind of lead what they want to do and kind of go through that play with them. And you can narrate it as well to help them understand. So this pretend play bumps up the developmental level of function, and this role playing really helps with social interaction and emotional learning as well. The relationship is really important in sensory regulation. You are going to be acting as a co-regulator for your child as your child is kind of learning how to do this on his or her own. So you're going to be having to be a detective, and you can work, with their occupational therapist on this, or there's lots of books there, but be present and be mindful and be a listener. And I'm sure that you guys are all super patient with your kids. It's tricky. Being organized to help your kiddo regulate. And then, we will eventually move from co-regulation to self-regulation. Providing clear expectations and clear boundaries, super helpful so that kids can anticipate what's coming next.
Aubrey, you're okay on time if you need to take a little bit of time.
Okay,
yeah.
We'll just do a little bit since we answered some questions. Therapy principles for collaborate. So it's really important to go slow with your kid and really be attuned to what they're seeing and feeling and thinking and hearing and trying to engage them. So going slow, using rhythm, holding back for a minute and giving them that wait time. And then I love this one, wonder. I can see you're trying to put on your shoes. I wonder if you could try this way, or I wonder if you're going to put on the right or the left first, or hey, I wonder what would happen if we moved this couch cushion over here, whatever it is, wondering with them. You can also talk through their play and say, oh, I'm noticing this is happening. I wonder if blah. And there's this beautiful cycle of I notice and then I wonder, and helping them to perceive those things and kind of make this plan. You're kind of narrating it for them. And then something I'm not great at, as you can all tell by now, is that silence is okay. And that's giving the kids the time to process. This is more on collaborate. So share and problem solving interactions, helping to elaborate a play plan. If they're like, oh, I'm just gonna go and play on the swings. Oh, well, what exactly are you gonna do? Which swing are you gonna go to? Are you gonna invite a friend? Do you think you're gonna swing forward and back? Or are you gonna try side to side? Are you gonna, sit on your bum or swing on your tummy like Superman? That's gonna be really helpful for some of these kids. Increasing the range of interaction and tolerance. asking questions, and then highlighting accomplishments. Really important, because sometimes these kids know what they're doing wrong, but we don't always tell them exactly what they're doing right. And then this is one of my favorites, is enjoy. And I know that it's hard to do this sometimes with our students and kids with autism and sensory processing disorder and screaming kids, super hard. But if we can enjoy that relationship, those kids, they know whether we're having fun or not. They know, and they can read it so quickly if you're having fun with them. Even if you think they're not noticing and they're not making eye contact with you and they're in their own world, they still know. And it's our job to show them we're enjoying it. And obviously this doesn't happen every single time, but it's important to do it as much as we can. These boundaries help everybody feel safe, and you'll see the kids kind of test your boundaries. You know this as parents, but if you hold fast to them, eventually we'll see a decrease in the behaviors and they know what to expect. And that's something that they really like. Obviously, we talked about this one. Finding the joy can be hard. It's good to have a friend to talk to and a support system, and then some self-reflection. Why did I not find joy with this kid? What can I do next time? And what can I do when my son freaks out when we're going to the door? What can I do next time? And just starting to problem solve out loud with friends, with neighbors, with your spouse, with your kid even. You can do some of that. And then one of the S's is sensory integration, obviously, which we kind of talked about. It's important to give the just right challenge. Some of these sensations might be a little too much for kids to understand and to perceive, but we want to make sure to try to give them the just right challenge. And that's going to take some trial and error, and that's okay. We want to relate to function and child-directed. We obviously want to have the kids kind of explore what they like and use those things to be child-directed. And then the last one in process is success. So this one, when we are successful in things, that's going to form our opinions and our understanding of self-esteem and self-confidence. So we don't want to give things to kids that are constantly too hard and too challenging and give them so much feedback. Oh, try this. No, do it this way. Okay, do this. We want to encourage them, and we want to give them the just right challenge, or in the zone of proximal development. This is the last point until we go to questions. So we're pretty close here. I'll just go through. But pre-teaching and training, we did talk about this a little bit, but touching on what do you think is going to happen so the kids can know what to expect. And we talked a little bit about visual schedules and maybe some homework, maybe saying, hey, we've got to do these 4 things when we come home from school. You can pick the order they go in, but we've got to do these 4 things before bed. Or, we want to try this. What do you think should go on there? What 4 things do you want to do? And kind of giving them a choice. If they're not ready for those choices, you put the 4 things on there or the 3 things on there, and they just do it, and then they can take it off and put it on the other side. And maybe when they complete it, they get a reward or they get some praise or whatever it is, and they feel good. And you can remind them, even Santa uses a list, and he's got to have a schedule to get around the world, in one night. So we can use a list too, and that's okay. Anticipating difficulties. So as you think about the holidays, what's hard for your child? What's tricky for them? And if they're at an age where they can talk through these things, talk through them with your child and say, hey, these are some things that we're anticipating, that we're expecting. What do you think we could prepare to have? What tools can we prepare to get through these things? And then I've listed some of the things that we might be anticipating. And then here's some tool ideas. So this comes from Kim Clary, and she likes coping blocks. On the next slide, it will talk about these a lot more, and you can see those in the notes. But her feelings here are frustrated, anxious, and she described it as shooting energies, sensory-wise, coming through her body. So she would make coping blocks, because sometimes when we're in that sensory meltdown, our frontal lobe is shutting down a little bit, and we're going into the more primitive parts of the brain with the amygdala, and more emotionally based and not quite as reason-based. So it's tricky to find the language in that moment to use in order to describe how we're feeling. So if we can have some kind of system, like a visual or a different system, I'm going to show a couple, then that's going to be so much easier for the kid to have a meltdown. And we're like, hey, well, just tell me what's wrong. Tell me what's wrong. And they're just still screaming. And they're not in the brain and the mindset and the part of the brain that we need to be in to communicate orally. But they could maybe point to something or use blocks. So these are just some ideas. And then here's some strategies. She's going to say, I'm frustrated. Okay, one of my strategies, deep pressure. And sometimes she would use these blocks and she'd say, hey, I'm feeling this. And one of her strategies is to take a break and go to her quiet place. And so she could put her blocks out on the table and then go to her place, and they would be saying, hey, where's Kim? But then they'd look at the blocks and that's where she was. Another strategy that I've even used, which is great, is like a number system. So on a scale of 1 to 10, like, how sick are you? Like when I've been in my morning sickness, I'll tell my husband, I'm at a 9, don't touch me, don't look at me, I will vomit. Please, I'm dying, just do not come over here because I will throw up. And so I'll just say, instead of saying that because I'm in, my headspace isn't good, I'll say, I'm at a 9. And he's like, okay, back off and bring a bowl. Sometimes it's hard to understand too, even when you're saying, hey, I don't feel good. We don't know how high or low it is, or we don't know how nervous you are. And we don't know how emotionally or sensory wise how you're doing. So you can teach a kid, 1 is I'm just fine, like maybe 9 is I'm really aggravated and I need to take a break and I'm starting to melt down, and maybe 5 or 6. So checking in with your kids during the holidays, and they can just flash numbers, so it can be really subtle, and you don't have to be embarrassed, but you're just checking in with your child, and it helps them to become a little bit more aware. What number am I at? And then also here's a list of apps that you can use to be communicating, because it is hard to communicate in that moment. Okay, and then the zones of regulation. And just for time, we'll just kind of skip over this, but just being able to identify your emotions with a certain color. Here's the real program, but I like the inside out characters too. And then just some more tools. Ask, a teacher that works with your student, what's working so far, and have your child come up with some of their tools, or you can kind of be a detective and notice, hey, I'm noticing that you calm down with this kind of music. Let's play this during our transitions. Having them pick the music they want to play during the transitions. And now I will take a breath and be quiet, and we can have a cool discussion.
All right, thanks, Aubrey. If any of you have any questions that you've been holding in and would like to type them in the chat, that would be awesome. And then I did mention in the chat that I'm going to launch a poll just to have you fill out just as an evaluation. So I'm going to do that now. And if you wouldn't mind taking a second to do it, that would be awesome. All right, so Aubrey, we have another question. We had one that, let's see. The parent asks, what if your SOR kid does better with a fidget toy in his hand, but the teacher won't allow any? And Ryan and I gave a little feedback, but we'd love to hear what you have to add to that.
Okay. Thank you for giving feedback. Ryan and Maria are like wells of knowledge. They're awesome, and I learn a lot from them. So definitely take what they have into consideration as well. I would say that fidgets are really important, and the teacher, you can work together as an IEP or a 504 team to help us teacher understand why the student might need a fidget. Sometimes fidgets can become toys, and it can become distracting to other students. In that instance, I've kind of gone into classes and done a presentation, and there's other OTs in the district who do this as well. But we'll present to a class a little bit about sensory and the importance to have fidgets, and say, some of us need this and our bodies need it to stay alert and awake and to learn and to attend, and some of us don't. But if you present it to the whole class, then usually kids aren't like, oh, why does he get this? And sometimes teachers can be turned off to fidgets because of that reason. Another reason is that if it becomes a toy and they're not necessarily doing the work, then that's a problem too, and you can talk to your child about that. But there's been a lot of instances in 504s and different places that you can use an appropriate fidget that's not disruptive, that's not going to distract another kid around them or that child, but it should be allowed if that child really does do much better with it. And then the OT or a school site can also go in and do some observations and take some data to track, is this fidget working or is it not? We've done a lot of accommodations with fidgets like Velcro under the desk and different things and even gum. And the teachers that I've worked with, once we explain it, it can go a little bit better too. So I would explain maybe why it's some of the science.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, another question. So this parent has a teenage stepdaughter that is SOR. She doesn't want to ever leave her bedroom. She grew up in a very quiet household and is now in a blended family with an SUR son. So it's very different from what she's used to. Any resources to slowly expose her to others? So
Yeah.
Imagine what can be done to help her get out of her room.
I mean, that one's tricky, right? And kudos to you for being a mom of lots of family members with different sensory profiles. And I would say I look a lot as an OT at routines in the day. And there might be times of the day in your household that are a little bit more quiet and a little bit more, safe for your stepdaughter to come out. Maybe in the mornings, maybe at bedtime. And maybe most kids are in bed or most people are in bed, but maybe one sibling is still up brushing their teeth. And maybe we can kind of start coming out at a time during the day that it's not as much to absorb sensory wise. And then I would also say, it's okay to use, I'm sure you've tried this, but to use noise canceling headphones, to use little earplugs, to use a schedule. Try coming out for 1 minute, and then try coming out for 2 minutes and working up. We call that systematic desensitization, and it takes a while. I kind of think of the classic psychology example where if you're afraid of, snakes or spiders, you just start by thinking about it, and then maybe eventually you can talk about it, and then maybe eventually you can see one from a distance, and eventually they come together. It's a terrible example, but it's kind of the way it is with systematic desensitization. You start slow and then eventually you work your way up. So hopefully you can start at a good time of day and then also for just a minute or two and reward and praise and then kind of extend that time.
I like that. That reminds me of what our OT taught us in preschool as far as giving breaks before they're needed instead of waiting until they're overstimulated and then trying to get them to calm down, but giving them the break before and to hopefully avoid the overstimulation.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
Okay, so another question. It seems a little overwhelming when you see traits of everything in your child. I can totally relate. Where do you start? My son just got diagnosed with autism 2 weeks ago. So do you have a go-to activity that would work with both?
Yeah, everything in your child. First of all, that is a big I wouldn't say burden. It's a big change to have a child diagnosed with autism. And so keep at it. It's a lot of emotions going through your head, and that child of yours can still have an amazing life and can be really rich. It totally is overwhelming when you see a little bit of all of these things. I would say first pick the behavior / the sense that's most, that's impacting the life the most and try to start there. But my go-to is always proprioception. So I do a lot of either passive or active proprioception with the students and the kids that I work with. So passive being I will do it to them. So things like squeezing or a little vibrational toy on the back to help there, or using a lot of weighted things that I'm working with, doing some activities on the ball or the trampoline where I'm kind of helping them. And then the active stuff is things they are doing. So things like animal jumps with pretending to be a frog, or we could try an elephant and how they walk super heavy, or a tiger or a crab. And they're doing all of these animal walks throughout. So they're getting so much good input into their joints, but they are doing it to themselves. That is something that I see a lot with, and then, or that I see a lot of success with. Jumping on the trampoline, rolling, scooter boards, those kinds of things. And then even spinning in an office chair at home, that's something that's really good and accessible even during cold weather. And really working on that relationship, becoming that play partner while your child is engaging in these sensory activities. So doing it with them if they can, or making up stories about what you're doing. We're animals going on a safari. And I know that's quite a bit where you start, but I'll just rephrase. I think start with something that's the most tricky in your day, and or work with proprioception. That's going to be one of your big wins.
Okay, thank you. And the parent just said, thank you so much. So, okay, I lost track. Okay, I feel like my child might have SUR and I'm looking for tools in the classroom to help him stay tuned in. He tends to zone out easily.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're kind of recognizing some of these things in your child. I'll say this, even as an OT, it's still tricky to, actually classify these kids with different things, but I'm so glad that you're seeing those symptoms. Definitely, I've seen that in the classroom with a lot of my kiddos, and I'd say sometimes it's really important to look at the sensory situation of your student, and then also look at the sensory situation of the teacher. I've had a kid with sensory under responsivity, and his teacher was super quiet, and she was an over responsive person. And so he was always zoned out because she just wasn't giving enough for him. This might sound crazy, but maybe you can have your student sit next to some kid that's maybe a little bit more active and hyper, so that can kind of wake them up. Another thing is you can have your student kind of sitting at the front of the classroom, so they really are engaged. And then, have your student have something to fidget with in their hands, like we kind of talked about, and have some input coming in. Sometimes I'll use gum and they need to just chew that to wake up, or some sour candy, or they need a lot of input right before class. I'll also work with teachers and talk to teachers about how to do movement breaks with the whole class, so that your student is getting movement that they need, but also there's a lot of other students in the classroom that might need that movement. And that movement will wake up the student before like a math session. So you can give some of those suggestions to the teacher, but you can also reach out to your OT to consult and give some of those suggestions to the teacher as well.
All right, thank you. Okay. Another question, can you explain why the movement is not thought to calm now?
I think that is in relation to sensory craving. The theory behind that was, and like when I say theory, like scientific theory, but also just people's theories. So there needs to be more research done in the field. But the theory is that it was almost like an addiction. So the more of that movement you got, the more you needed it, and it would maybe heighten your threshold and you just need more and more. Now we're, sorry, I don't think I answered that right. The movement is not thought to calm because you do need more and more. I think that kind of helps. I don't know if I'm answering that right, but we wanted to, the movement, we thought maybe the more you get, you would calm, but now we know that you do kind of want more and more. So before, we would see some kids that would just say, go out and get them a ton of movement. And the theory was that once their threshold was met, that they would be able to calm down. But now we know that that threshold kind of keeps moving. And the idea is that it needs to be functional so that the kid can know, hey, this is the parameters. These are the boxes that I can move in. Otherwise, it's a little bit more arousing and more stimulating, and they need more and more. Now, I know that answer was really disorganized. So if you want to email me, I can also respond in a written way that's a little bit less disorganized.
I forgot I muted myself. Do you have your contact information on the end of the presentation?
I don't know, but
Do you want to type your email into the chat real quick?
Yes.
Or I can cut and paste it.
Okay, I think it should, oh, that was to Laura. Hey, Laura, now you have my email. Now this is to everyone. There we go.
Okay, all right. Okay, another question. I would love suggestions for how to help a child that has opposite needs. So opposite sensory profile as the parent.
Yeah, this one's really hard. And I think we've gotten a couple questions tonight about this, that it's worth saying. And I'm looking at time, we're still good. So first of all, there are clinics out there that do this, that can do sessions and treatment with parents and child at the same time, or they can work with just the child or just the parent. And there's only so much that a school district can do. So if you're looking for more, I think a clinic would be really well versed in doing this. There are clinics like, sorry, I'm getting the hiccups. There's a Utah County clinic, Utah Valley Hospital. There's one associated called Orem Pediatrics. And so they do a lot of this. There's one up in Salt Lake called the University of Utah Life Skills Clinic, and it's associated with the U of U, and they do a lot of sensory integration. And so I would say if you're worried about different sensory strategies in the house, there's a lot that you can learn from a clinic. And it might be worth your time maybe. Not that I'm referring you, but just saying that there are some good options out there for some extra help if tools here don't quite cover it. But that being said, there are some things that you can do. So you can know, just first of all, I just wanted to validate that you have a different sensory profile or different sensory needs than your child. And the first step is recognizing it. So that's already amazing, because before you may have realized, why do I not get along with this child? I am so struggling. And let me just, I'll have to put in the chat the book that I'm going to refer to here, but it's by Lucy Jane Miller. And it talks about different kids. Okay. And I'll go grab it. I'll have my husband grab it. Will you grab the book, the sensory processing book? I think it's on my nightstand. But it talks about parents and different sensory profiles and different sensory ideas and needs than their child. And it talks about how do you meet your child's needs and also your needs. So for instance, I guess they have a child in there whose name is Ben. Thank you. And he's got sensory craving, but his sister is sensory over responsive, and so is the mom. But the dad is also sensory craving, probably, but just not diagnosed. And so the dad takes that little boy out on runs a lot, and they'll go with their dogs so they can get auditory, and the kid can pull the dogs and run with them or be pulled by the dogs. And that gives kind of a break to the mom, and then it helps regulate the sensory craving kid, so that when he comes back, he's now calm and he's had a functional activity with a beginning, middle, and end, and now we've gotten that input that we need. Additionally, I love parks because you can send your kid to the playground and they can create their own play plan, And then you can sit on the bench if you're a little sensory overresponsive and just wait for a minute. And after an hour maybe, and it might be a little bit longer than you're ready for, but after a while, your child will become a little bit more regulated. The book is called Sensational Kids. It's by Lucy Jane Miller. She's the one who was also in charge of the STAR Center. And it's a great book that talks about signs and symptoms and treatments. And it comes with so many stories and case studies. And then it kind of talks about a little bit like what can you do with your child when you have different sensory needs. But trying to meet your child's needs and trying to meet your needs at the same time sometimes takes a middle person, and it sometimes takes a discussion. And those things are very helpful, especially if your child's a little bit older and can handle that discussion. That's okay. And if not, if you have a spouse or a sibling, or sorry, not a sibling, a different child, a sibling of the child that can help out, that can be super helpful as well.
Okay, I'm going to ask another question then. Well, will you type in really quick the name of the author for Out of Sync Child?
Yes.
I know
that one is Carol Stock Kranowitz. Okay.
Okay. Another question. How do we work with some of this sensory stuff that we know will change in the future? Like, for example, my son needs to chew on items, but right now wears a mask in groups. How do we work with that?
Sure.
Can I throw something in? I actually was just on an IEP meeting. So as a parent consultant, I can attend IEP meetings with parents. And this was discussed. And they did talk about giving the student permission to chew gum. And they could chew gum underneath the mask. But that was one suggestion, but you probably have way more.
No, I agree. Chewing gum underneath the mask is huge. Also, if it's like an oral kind of thing, something that we can do is like sucking on sour candies, like Warheads. Those are really great if that's something that your child might respond well to. Sometimes for better or for worse, I'll see the students I work with chewing on their masks. And we always want to replace that because those masks are important for, COVID reasons. So chewing gum is helpful, or being able to have like jewelry that you can put underneath your mask. I think I showed a picture of those Legos with string attached, which would be kind of like a necklace. So being able to do that. And I think gum, and then there are some chewy candies out there too that last a little bit longer, and so you can look at those. Jerky lasts a little bit, so you can eat that under your mask and keep your mask on just fine. And then also I think sometimes it's fun to do like powdered drinks, so a powdered lemonade, and just suck on that because it's really concentrated, so it's going to be really sour and really alerting. So it just depends on if they need that oral stimulation for the proprioception and the chewing in the jaw, or if they need it for like the taste and alerting of the sensation. So those are some things that you can do under masks. And then it might change in the future, and that's kind of the name of the game with sensory. Some of these things are going to work for maybe a week or two or a month, and then things are going to change. And so you're going to need kind of a bag of tricks to cycle through, and that's okay. And that's how it's kind of supposed to be.
Awesome ideas, thanks. Okay, one more question. So this is our last question, unless anybody has one that they've been hesitant to post. Hurry and do it. All right, can your child maybe have a mixture of two? My boy is high functioning autistic and is sensory seeking and takes a little bit more stimulation. So sensory craving and SUR?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important here to point out, I think the diagnosing, for lack of a better term, or the classification that we as parents are going to go through might be less important than what we do about it. And so, yeah, there might be a mixture, and maybe it's not, and maybe we don't know, but let's try some strategies that will work. But absolutely, your child might have a mixture of the two, and that's very common. And it's common to have like sensory seeking in some areas, like maybe we're really into touching everything on the wall, but we're really sensitive to noises, but we really need to move around and talk and all these things. And so there might be components based on any of those 8 senses that we talked about at the beginning. They might have differences in each of those 8 senses and how they're interpreting information from those.
And even maybe in different situations as well.
Yeah, definitely in different situations.
Settings.
I think that it can depend on emotional things that they're going through or things at school. Our sensations and the way our brain is processing things is tied to emotions, and it is tied to how we see the world. So if we're a little bit more anxious about something, we might be a little bit more sensory over responsive. If we're at home and we're in our comfortable zone, we might be a little bit less on guard and a little bit more relaxed, depending on the situation and the environment.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we have a few more questions that just came in. So any suggestions for a child who can't keep his hands to himself at school?
Yeah, right. I totally see this one all the time. I affectionately call this the grabby hands child, right? But we want this child to be able to fidget with something under the desk and teach them appropriately how to use it. B, if we're just needing to move around and keep our hands, sometimes let me back up for a second. Sometimes kids are touching other people because they just need to know where their body is in space. So they'll push away from somebody else so they can feel back where their body is. And so we want to know, why are they touching kind of things and everything? If so, let's give them a movement break or some kind of sensory break before that happens. A lot of the times we can suggest things like, if your kid is an AM track kid, can you have the teacher leave the chairs up on the desks at the beginning of the day and have the kid come in and his specific functional job is to take the chairs down. And that might help him proprioceptively and deep pressure kind of regulate and be able to say, ooh, and not have to just touch everything and wonder. Touching everything can happen because you're sensory craving, but it can also happen for a myriad of reasons. But I think that functional proprioceptive activity of a movement before or recess before or taking the chairs down can really help with that grabbing hands, along with a fidget.
All right, great answer. Good answers, Aubrey. Doing awesome. Okay, so a couple of parents have the same question, and I might answer it just from my point of view as a consultant.
Yeah.
And then you can answer it as your point of view from the school side of things in OT. How's that? So do you have any suggestions for how to work with a teacher who is more resistant to making accommodations? And then they added, without offending her. So my input on this is, number one, accommodations are all about accessing the curriculum. So does the student need the accommodations in order to be able to focus on their work, access the curriculum? So that's kind of the underlying purpose of accommodations, because remember, we're in the educational setting looking at that, accessing education, accessing the curriculum. I'm going to let you go, Aubrey, and then if I think of anything else, I'll add to it. But that's just kind of what came to my mind as far as the logistics part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm in the same boat, as an OT, I'm like, oh, we can try all these things. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, is this affecting their access to the education? And is the sensory behavior big enough that it is impacting learning, or it's impacting another student's learning in the classroom?
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at that. If it's something that's just a little quirky, I know that sounds silly, like maybe my carpet example, we can work around it. But if it is something that is truly impacting access to the education and the learning environment of your student, your child, or others, then we do need to address it. And that is accommodation. I would love to say that I've never come across a teacher who's had issues with this, but that would be a lie. I like to educate these teachers a little bit more on sensory integration and the purpose of it, because it does seem like a toy if we're needing to make like a fidget accommodation, or Teachers have a lot on their plate already, and they're doing so much, the best they can, especially this year. But it is tricky to make a change sometimes. So I think that making it super simple for the teacher to say, try this one strategy, can help that teacher to do that strategy with more fidelity, and then maybe create a little bit more buy-in of, hey, this actually works. And if it doesn't work, that's okay as well. We can try something different. But I do like to help educate the teacher, try just one strategy, and then take maybe a little bit of data, whether it's like actual like numbers, this kid focused for 2 minutes, or if it's just, the kid got a smiley face today instead of a medium or a frowny face on their tracker. But keeping it really simple, because a lot of the teachers are really overwhelmed and they see it as a toy. So keeping it simple and then educating a little bit can go a long way.
Well, and another thing too that came to my mind, so I asked the parents if the children have IEPs, and yes, they do, but the sensory accommodations aren't currently included. So another thing you can do is ask to have an IEP meeting or a meeting with the IEP team. Doesn't have to be an official IEP meeting, but to meet with the IEP team and ask them if they would invite the OT, and then be able to have that discussion at the table could be super helpful too. Because if the teacher is feeling overwhelmed and wondering, how am I going to add this one more thing to everything that's going on in the classroom, having the OT there can help explain how to add it and make it more feasible and doable for the teacher so that it's not overwhelming. And the OT can support the teacher too. So it's not all on the teacher to provide it, but yeah, the OT can definitely add some support as well.
Definitely. I mean, it would be really tricky to expect all teachers to do this all the time, right? And teachers have so much on their plate. That's why we're here. I would also add, if your student doesn't currently have OT on the IEP, that's okay, but we may want to do some kind of an observation in the classroom as well, so the OT kind of knows what's going on. Because if your student needs sensory accommodations, but there's not an OT necessarily on the IEP, then we'd want to bring one into the team. And if there is one, awesome, let's go with it. We're very much, and Ryan knows this too, we're very much involved with teachers as well as students. And it's part of our job to form those relationships with those teachers, just as much as it is the relationship with the kids, sometimes even a little bit more, because the teacher's working with the student every single day. And so it's really our role to educate the teacher, but also support them and help them out with some of these things.
Awesome. All right. Oh, under the wire. Okay, we just got a couple more minutes. So, is a 504 necessary in order to get sensory accommodations? If the student has an IEP, then no, because accommodations are included in the IEP. If the student does not have an IEP, then you would want to request a 504 plan, because that's where accommodations are provided. And I've got that information if you want to email me, but I've also got it on our parent resource website. So if you go to the Alpine School District website and then go to special ed, on the top left corner, there's a parent resource button, and you can click on that. And there's a lot of resources on 504s and the referral form and all that. So, but you're more than welcome to contact me as well. But yeah, so if they have an IEP, then no, they don't need a separate 504 plan. And then let's see. Ryan Hemming just mentioned that we have OTs in every school in the district, and they are awesome. They are super awesome, and they work really well with the teachers and the teams.
And I would just add too, you as parents know your child really well. I would maybe, if you're getting an OT involved, I'd give them an opportunity to do some kind of an observation in the classroom as well, and maybe talk with you or talk with the teacher, just so that they can get on board and kind of be on the same the same page as you in order to give good suggestions, because we do a lot of good work with parent input, but sometimes it's really important to get that observation as well. There may be something going on that might actually look like sensory, but it's something different. And so that's why we'd want to, as an OT, go in and kind of get a good observation, get a good assessment and evaluation. Some of those sensory things could be something that is actually manifesting like a behavior or something. So we'd want to go through and make sure that we can give an appropriate suggestion for that sensory behavior.
Awesome. All right, and just a kudo to Aubrey. There's been several parents that have said thank you very much and been super grateful for the information. This last one said, thank you to you all. This is my first time attending one of these parent nights. It has been incredibly helpful. Truly, thank you. And thank you. Lots of thank yous. So Aubrey, thank you so very much for sharing your expertise and knowledge and your effort in putting together this awesome PowerPoint with all the information.